In the northern part of the kingdom west, this is where Lionsgate lies. Here the bird sings outside his nest as he greets the morning sunrise. In Lionsgate, 'neath the tall fir trees, on your face feel the ocean breeze. Feel the magic that's in the air, in Lionsgate the fair.
Cloud. Recording has now started. Your Excellency, it is in your hands. I'm muting.
Great. Greetings. Welcome to the Lion's Den first panel discussion. I am Sir Kenrick Bearson, Baron of Lionsgate. Please welcome our two guest hosts for this evening's discussion. We would like to briefly introduce them before turning over the evening and possibly our lives over to them for the next hour or so. Neither of our guest speakers require a lengthy introduction. They are both men who have shaped our kingdom and have been standing awfully close to the people who have, some of whom are being interviewed here tonight. They are both people who have been the first to stand up to injustice both in public and in private, something we have witnessed in their roles as knights and protectors of this kingdom and society. I have known Sir Antonio Romeo Maria de Francesco de San Gin. Okay.
That counts as mispronouncing a name. That's a drink.
For over 30 years, having met him at my second event. He has presented a talk here previously, and we've already made fun of how old he is, so we're going to move on to his grace. Duke Ulfred Bloodfooter Falgerson comes from a long line of Viking royalty here in An Tir, having been raised in the Varangian Guard. He became Baroness Amanda's combat champion in 1996 and has been making women smile ever since. His passionate dedication to the game, his hard work, bardic prowess, and leadership has seen him through 4 reigns as Prince of Tiri and as the former king in both Drakenwald and here in An Tir. Sir Antonio and Duke Ulfr, we turn the evening over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's ironic that you bothered to introduce us because really, if this goes properly, we're just background. So our main job is to ask interesting questions and then sit back and enjoy with the rest of you as these much more interesting people answer them. I'm going to quickly introduce these people. They're going to introduce themselves hopefully in more detail in a minute, but I'm just going to run through them super quickly. Not, if you'll forgive me, in order of precedence, but in order of speaking. So just to make that a little easier. So our first, the person who's going to the way this is going to work is we have 5 questions that we're going to sort of put out to the panel to have them tackle collectively. One person's going to start the conversation off, and then we'll have a little bit of back and forth amongst the panelists. And then when that peters out, we'll move on to the next one. The person who's going to tackle our first question, which is about how the culture of the SCA has evolved a little bit, is Jarl Ulfred. He was a Knight of the West. He's a Laurel Apellican and was the 15th and 20th Prince of An Tir and our 3rd King. And he is a Lion of An Tir. Our second speaker is going to be, sorry, Ulfred, I'm just going to run through everybody and then I'll start tackling questions. Our second speaker is going to be Duchess Ludviga, who is a Laurel Apellican and a member of the Order of the Carp. She was our 16th and 20th Queen, and she is a Lion of An Tir. Our third speaker is going to be Mistress Rowenna. I can't speak actually at all. She's going to talk about diversity and inclusion, which is a super topical topic, and I'm really interested to hear what these people have to say about it. And it's such a broad topic, so I'm really keen on this one. Rowenna was Laurel of the West, a Pelican of An Tir. She's a Magistrate Ithra, and she's Laurel of An Tir. Berek von Langental is going to tackle the virtual SCA. I saw your little clever slip in there earlier, Berek. That was very smooth. He's a Pelican, a member of the Order of the Carp, was the 6th King of An Tir, and is a Lion of An Tir. And we're going to sort of wind up the evening. Thane Oak, who's a Pelican, was the 1st Prince of Tir Re, and is a Lion of An Tir, is going to introduce the idea of the virtual SCA, which of course is topical since we're having a virtual chat now. I'm really interested in the way the internet has changed the SCA, both before the pandemic and now especially, that it's our major conduit. So what I'd like to do now is just have the 5 panelists give a quick introduction to themselves and briefly just sort of, you can freestyle a little bit on how you imagine the SCA has changed a little in the recent past. Ulfred, do you want to start us off?
So let me ask, did you want me to address the first question as part of this, or did you just want me to do that brief?
Let's do a really quick run around the introduction, and then we'll tackle the questions afterwards.
All right. My name is, as he said, Jarl Sir Ulfred Draumfjalr, and I am a resident in Three Mountains, have been for quite a long time, and actually started in the SCA as one of the founders of, well, we called it Court of All at, or no, we called it Caerleon the first year, and we had to change it to Court of All in the second year. But anyway, and that was in the good old year of 1975, Common Era, and so my whole, even though I'm a Knight of the West, my whole career has been in An Tir. So. Vast changes, of course, across the time, really, and I think it's always been growth and improvement in many ways. There are things we're always going to be nostalgic about in our innocent younger days, but overall, I think that as an organization, as a society, it has been an upward growth all along. So not always a common opinion, but I do believe so.
Nice. Ludviga, do you want to give us a brief intro?
There we go. Trying to click on the wrong button, of course. So drink, because technology. And we have to add when the animal, usually the cat, like mine just did, has to jump up. You have to drink then too. So there it is.
Nice.
I am Duquesa Ludviga, currently the storm maker of the Berek von Langental. See my groovy cloak right there, which is the Arts and Sciences champion of that barony. I started in 16. I was actually on Ulfred and Simingo's court when they were the final prince and princess of An Tir, and then with Morag and Manfred as first king and queen of An Tir, and haven't taken any breaks for some reason. I don't know why, like people seem to do, but there you go.
And you gave me my AA, as it happens.
I did.
You did.
Oh, you did. Well, good for me.
I think so. All right, Rowenna, take it away.
Well, I have the title these days of Mu'allima, which is a Middle Eastern title, which means teacher. And I figure I've been around long enough that I'm at least teaching some people something. And Jarl Ulfred, I had forgotten that you were in the SCA a year longer than I was, because I started in 1976 and I've been in the SCA, playing in the SCA for my entire adult life. And I'm probably one of the only people here who actually started in the Kingdom of the West, because I first went to, and my first SCA event was the 10th anniversary of the SCA at Big Trees on May 1st, 1976. And then got my brain together and went to An Tir and been here ever since. And one of the things that I find a really wonderful change that's happened over the past 45 years is the huge increase in awards that recognize all the work that people are doing, because now there's so many more people, there needs to be more awards. And I'm really glad that these awards are just coming up, because there's a lot of hard work being done.
Excellent. Topical as well. Nicely done. Berek, take it away.
Hi, I'm Officer Berek von Langental. It's good to know that I'm not the longest lived person here. I started playing AS-13. Pretty much I missed out on crossing paths with Jarl Ulfred when I first moved here from the west to Cordoval. I'll talk later on background of my first experiences of it. I was probably one of the first people who had roots in the west, moved up to An Tir, and then having to spread the word down to the west of why An Tir really needed to become a kingdom unto its own, but that's a whole nother story. Throughout the years, I have been a sergeant emeriti. I served on the board of directors, Kingdom Royal Marshal, King, as you mentioned, Knight, trying to stay as active as much as I can. Unlike Ludwiga, since I was raising two boys, I needed to take a break. The funny thing was that before I took a break, here I would be driving up to Madrona, Lionsgate, with the back of a van filled with sweaty leather armor, as my oldest son decided he wanted to take a break from the SCA. He wanted to do roller hockey. So here I am now driving up to Seattle, to Vancouver, BC, with the back of a van filled with sweaty leather armor. So nothing really changed there, except we got to stay in hotels, which we're kind of doing now. Again, my topic is going to be virtual anachronism, something I'm very excited about. And I thank you very much for inviting me onto this panel.
Thank you for coming. Oak, bring us home.
Well, I don't know. I'm, I guess, one of the locals here. I've been playing for 35 plus years, something like that now. I was knighted by Berek. And
twice.
Yeah.
Knighted twice.
Twice knighted, yeah.
Which is a great story, too.
Yeah, well, going with what's been talked about, too, I had to wait 18 years to get my buffet. But, you know, that's another story.
Also topical.
Yes. I'm a little confused what I'm talking about today. I thought I was talking about how we got the history of the SCA as our.
You're right. You're totally right. I got confused.
Okay, good.
You're smarter than I am, which is perfect.
I saw the look on his face, like, what am I talking about? From you, it's like, I'm gonna step all over this man.
So, and I know I've been Prince of Thierry, and I'm now trying to push Thierry towards Kingdom myself. And but again, that's another story. So, I guess we can start.
Awesome. Hopefully that knighted twice thing we'll fill in some details later on in the evening. Ulfred, why don't we start with you? My recollection is that the SCA used to be really silly. It used to be like the first event, they started the first event with the reading of Winnie the Pooh in Latin, and our knighting ceremony is based on Lord of the Rings. And there's been a big shift where we've sort of gotten much better at research. And I'm just sort of wondering about sort of the intersection between us becoming a more serious historical society and us like leaving behind that sort of childish frivolity. And I don't know if that's me being nostalgic or not, but I'm dying to hear your take on it.
Well, I would have to say that I think that there's a fair amount of accuracy in that statement. You know, I will admit my memories have faded over time of those early years, but I was attending college in Cordoval when Dublin, O'Gwyn, Sir Dublin, ran into the SCA. He attended the first Eagles tourney and came back and showed us these pictures. And you couldn't see much. They're just little photographs. And but what we could see was the feast table, just picnic table loaded with a full suckling pig in the middle of the table. And I knew I was joining at that point in time. But later on, I got into this fighting stuff. But anyway, so we started traveling, and there were basically 4 places to travel to from Cordoval: Adiantum, Three Mountains, Lions Gate, and Madrona. And so that's where we traveled on the weekends. We would load into my car and head off with nothing. And some of the interesting people that I met in those first few events were people named like the Gray Mouser and Pippin and, you know, other infamous names from fantasy and science fiction. And they were living those characters, right? So very much so, not based on how medieval we were going to look and everything. Everybody was patching together their attempt at proper medieval garb, excuse me. And, you know, frankly, under today's, you know, examples, you would consider it not much of an attempt, but you know, that nobody cared. We were all young, and it was very much based on, you know, the outgrowth of the 60s, 70s counterculture. So that was, you know, that was what it was. I think, but it didn't take long after that, as the growth was fairly accelerated. It didn't take long before, you know, more serious attempts were being made to do better efforts at the garb and that. In particular, probably when we started traveling a little more down to the Bay Area, you know, we ran into folks that were a little further ahead, if you will, in their cultural evolution in the Bay Area. You know, I've seen the early pictures. You know, we started just like they did, and they started just like we did. But you know, the culture does develop, and so then I think that influenced us quite a bit too. So, and for me personally, it was really not until connecting up more with. Not just connecting up with Steingrim, but subsequently with Stormcrow, who really started the Varangian Guard, and then those early inductees into the Varangian Guard, who really started to shift my experience more towards, let's be real good in how we look in terms of being Vikings, and that really started to drive, I think, people would, as an example, I don't think it was the demands, it was that other folks said, that looks damn cool, I want to be like that too. And so then you had that cultural explosion along those lines. And, but even during those periods, there was a lot of aggravating silly going on. I mean, I'm sure there were lots of the older peers that absolutely hated me and my cronies, who were obnoxious, young loudmouths, and you know, swaggering around in the middle of the night and causing all sorts of disruption. Silly in our own ways, silly Viking games like Ulf was exposed to in his youth.
I forgot. And, I'd forgotten the silly Viking games.
Yep. So anyway, but for a long time, we had both to a large degree, you know. At the same time that the Varangian Guard was getting settled in their ways, we were spending quite a bit of time hanging out with the Guccis. And, you know, and there was a contrast in points in time. So
we didn't spend much time looking good, if I recall.
Yeah.
The West.
Well, it depends on how much you feel like a you know, a mountain of Budweiser beer cans is ambiance. That's
And what was on the staff of the chief of the Gucci?
The monkey.
Was it a monkey or was it Kermit the Frog?
It was Kermit the Frog. Well, it was various things. Sam had a sock monkey that his mother made him when he was a kid.
I thought it was.
Then there was the gold painted Kermit went on there when Gerhard von Nordflammen made himself Pope of the Guccis, or I guess when Torgel made him Pope of the Guccis. Yeah. So
it's an interesting thing that you said there to me, Antonio, because you mentioned Gerhard von Nordenhlam, and I first met him, of course, as a resident of the West Kingdom, and they did a good job. The players down there in Rowenna, what was the barony?
Westermark.
Yes,
Westermark.
Yeah.
The Westermark players did a very good job of many things, maintaining a level of silliness at the same time as doing it in bringing forward aspects of medieval culture that were authentic in spirit, if not in necessarily full execution. And so there was that period here again where there was sort of a transition, right? Yeah. How can we be silly and in such a way that people can't complain that we are not being a good attempt at medieval culture, right? So I might mention that silly involved a lot of lampooning of the aristocracy, but not inappropriate. So anyway.
Someone in the chat has reminded us that the thing on the staff was sometimes Pukey Monkey that you had to pray to if you threw up, but also there was the Kermit Frog that Amanda gave us. Does anyone else want to jump in? I'm especially curious about. Well, we'll talk about the other. Go ahead. Anyone else have anything else they want to jump in with?
I was going to mention the Order of the Pernicious Lily, which I don't think has been given for a long time, and the criteria for the Order of the. Has anyone here received the Order of the Pernicious Lily?
Was that for great deaths?
That is for a great death at the end of a fight on the tourney field, isn't it? Is that the criteria?
Yep.
Curtis was just here. He received it too.
And we saw some spectacular deaths when someone was dying the second time.
Johannes Sinestris, who has since passed away, unfortunately, but he sang a portion of an aria at some, I think it might have been a July Coronation, so a Champions tournament. It was stunning. It was just a stunning, remarkable thing. Everyone watching just stopped and watched and listened, and then he keeled over and died. It was just brilliant.
Sorry, Berek, you wanted to jump in there?
I was about to say it was part of a trilogy of awards along with the Muckingtall Mall and the Shattered Shield.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's only been given out about half a dozen times over the last decade or so.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I am curious about, like, I remember, we used to start every Crown tournament with the weird melee. And I remember, like, they used to do things like there was a time where, like, Torgal had everyone throw the weapons into the middle of the field, and then he ran duct tape around it. And you had to run out there with your gauntlets and, like, wrestle other people to pull your stuff out. And it just feels like there's less of that preposterousness, which I'm not sure it's good or bad, but it feels like there was a lot more juvenile silliness. Of course, I was more juvenile then, so that could be just my experience. Ludwika?
I think part of that might have been because the Crown tournament list was not as big as it is now. I mean, you get 128 people out there, and there might not be a lot of time for frivolity. But certainly, I know what you mean, and I wonder about that. We used to also sing the Brave and Bonny Host during the processional, and that doesn't get done much anymore. And when it does, it seems like it's a dirge. And I am bound and determined to change that. But yeah, I think part of it is just the sheer volume of people involved that makes it more difficult.
The aspect of the Pernicious Lily, it outside of that award to try and encourage people, it was always admonishment to the fighters by the senior fighters to do good death scenes. Right? I mean, and don't just walk off the field. You die first, then you get up, acknowledge your opponent and walk off the field. There was a lot more of an onus of you are here to also provide a bit of a show.
Yeah.
It's not just a sport. And I think, and then the Pernicious Lily, of course, highlighted that by giving recognitions to people that particularly did it good over time. So, and blind samurai tournaments. Do you remember those?
I do. I do.
And the pandy bat.
The samurai ones are horribly unsafe, though.
Did we do pandy bat here, Ludwiga, or was that a kind of? I remember seeing pandy bat combat in the Kingdom of the West, but not. I don't recall, unless it was the time that the Westies came up here and made us run an event, and they said, "Do the pandy bat."
We did that 30 year.
Yeah, and Torvald certainly ran. I remember him.
It was invented in the West, but it moved up here, Rowenna, as an imported activity, if you will. Yeah. We were taking enough that we threw some of our own.
Yeah. The beaver cleaver was never safe either.
No.
It's true. It's true.
The beaver board was very scary.
So before the quite some of that silliness, we always started every principality tournament in the early days with a grand melee. Well, and I think they did that in the West too, didn't they, Rowenna? Started big tournaments with grand melees?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I do.
But Berek, I couldn't hear you.
Yes, just as a show of our Western roots, West Kingdom would always start with a grand melee, and we carried it on from there when we split off.
Yeah. Again, I think that's probably easier when there's 30 people on the field than when there's 120. So it's hard to follow this.
Yes.
Time-wise, and that was when you mentioned that logistically is why once you get to a certain size, time becomes a premium, and you know, when your grand processional is 10 minutes of people getting organized and then marching in and kneeling to the thrones as they go by, you know, you have time to sing a song and take a little more activity. But when it's 2 hours of people standing in line just so they can process through and then you know, get onto things, you have to take a different approach. So
absolutely.
So yes, and in terms of anachronism versus creative, in many ways we have so much more or historical creativity now than we would have ever even dreamed of in the early days would come to pass. But yeah, everything just feels a little bit serious because of the time, I think. Not because people are against silliness, but just where do you fit it in? So, yeah. So you see silliness in pockets, right? In subcultures where they are a little less involved in trying to do everything all at once, but rather more focused in what is our activity. Well, let's say I'm part of the archery community just because I don't know anything about them really in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis, but because I know they were a strong community locally, you know, here again, you have a community that's maybe 30 people. They can do all sorts of silly things because they're not going off to attend all of these other more serious activities because that's not their thing, right? And that's not a condemnation. That's sort of a monkey pod thing where, you know, what you do is sort of restricted to, you know, less than 100 people.
Can I throw a bit of a curveball at not just you, Ulfred, but everybody? I was talking to someone today actually about something that seems related to this, which is I feel like, I don't know if I can frame this in a way that is going to be at all productive, but I'm curious what your take on it. I feel like when I started in the 80s, there was much more of like an ideological historicalness. Like materially, we had stuff, we were still using carpet armor, but the king was the king, and we were sort of more able to sort of embody that sort of historical attitude of hierarchy and so on. And it feels like we're more now, I hear more people talking about their computers at events than I did when I was a kid. And I hear more people talking about we should elect a king than I used to. And I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts on that, or if you just want to back quietly away and not touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Well, I think that's an interesting observation. I mean, the first coronet I attended, I went on a Sunday, and it was Edward's first victory, and Zifron, and I didn't know who anybody was. But when I got there, it was early in the morning, and everybody came out, and they were very friendly and greeted me, you know, and even though I was sort of weird, you know, kid coming in, they were good that way, but they all said the same thing. Shh, we got to be quiet. The prince isn't up yet. He's still abed. And so everybody was being hushed. And for an hour, the first hour, we were all being quiet and stuff until finally Edward Zifron steps out of the tent and somebody hands him a coffee, and then activities ensue. But nothing was happening either because the prince was not up yet, you know. And so I think that illustrates your point to a degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard to imagine that happening now.
Yeah.
Maybe interkingdom anthropology, but AS-15, AS-16 in the West Kingdom. There's a documentary that was filmed before West Kingdom and Qaid, and they would interview all the people of the West Kingdom, and just about everyone would say computer programmer, computer programmer, computer programmer. So out of the West Kingdom, you had a lot of, well, people weren't talking about computers, they were talking about their computer background. So
Fair enough.
it was there, and the difficult thing was at West Kingdom events, it was, we don't talk about our computer programming jobs, we talk about being in the SCA.
Yeah. Well, I remember a time when it was sort of very taboo to talk about non-period stuff, and it feels like we've slipped a little. So ideologically, we've become more modern. Yeah, Olivia.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I do the same thing. And there's only so much control you have over what people are going to talk about in camp, you know. And with my apprentices and stuff, I try to say, hey, let's, you know, maybe put your goddamn phone away, and we're gonna talk about cooking, or we're gonna talk about something else, and we're not gonna talk about modern politics, and we're not gonna talk about whatever GIF you have new on your thing. So, and of course, I think it was Rafaela just said that we didn't really, a lot of us didn't have computers in the 80s, and even in the 90s, we just didn't have smartphones, we didn't have 6 computers in our houses, and I'm kind of a troglodyte, and I have several computers of my own now. It was actually Ivan from Stromgard who built my first computer in 80 something, but that was of course a tank of a computer and not anything that I could have taken anywhere. So it's just, I think all we can do is just encourage people like we were encouraged. Let's talk about something else and not all that crap that we have to deal with. Of course, it was a lot easier when we didn't all have phones. I remember having conversations with people about how nice it was to get away from the phone and the ringing of the doorbell and all that kind of stuff. Now everybody and their brother has a phone.
Well, and we can talk about this more when we get to the virtual SCA. I think it's harder now that there's constantly interaction between that, right? Half of my SCA experience is online, so it's hard to divorce that from the other half. With everyone's permission, let's move on to the next topic. We're half an hour in, and we're only 20% into our discussion. We'll be here till 11, which would be great for me, but maybe not for everybody else. Let's move on to the next one. So this is actually a nice segue. Regardless of what's going on with sort of our understanding of fealty or talking about mundane topics or anything, we have gotten darn good at the material presentation of history. We're fabulous at making nice armor. Our costumes look phenomenal. The scrolls look fabulous. And I'm just curious about the ups and downs of that, because it does feel like when I was a kid, I mean, not to be too nostalgic, when I was a kid and did this, you know, like a bed sheet and a pair of jeans and you were ready to go to an event with your pup tent. And now if you're not willing to lay out a couple of grand to buy a period tent and some nice historical underwear, you're sort of a second-class citizen. So there's great ups and downs to that. And I just want to hear you guys riffing on that. Take it away.
Well, I got to
go ahead.
Ludwig, I think you're taking lead on this.
Oh, am I? Okay.
Really?
I hope that that's not true. I don't want that to be true, that you know, laying out all that money just so that you cannot be harassed, and you know, there's rules against that now. It is a two-edged sword, of course, because I mean, I look back at what perhaps I might have been recognized for in whatever year that was, and my skill level at the time. There is a difference between then and now, in that now there is much more information available to your average human being everywhere on the planet. When I first started looking at Scythian art and Central Nomad or Central Asian art, there was one book available, and it was the Rice book, Tamara Rice, The Scythians, which after years of study and being able to see other publications, that book has a lot of misinformation in it, but that's what I had, you know. So I think the thing that concerns people most about the being recognized for arts and sciences 20 to 40 years ago and being recognized for arts and sciences today, I think the thing people are most concerned about is that the bar is raised too high. And I can't say that they're completely wrong, in my opinion. Although, because the information availability is so much greater now, there is reason to ask more of artisans to do a better job, because the information is there. It's completely available to anyone who can walk down to the library and use a library computer. I do think there can be a certain amount of gatekeeping that happens in arts and sciences elevations, which is distressing. And I and other, you know, people who actually give a shit about it try to do what we can to keep that from happening. But it's amazing. I mean, it's an ongoing learning curve. When I look at what I did, based on the research that I did 25 years ago or 30 years ago, it's a little embarrassing because a lot of my work was not really very good, and not really very period too. That's the other thing, is that because I didn't have access to the period representations, I didn't know, you know, a lot of it was just, to put a not too fine a point on it, bullshit. I had to make a lot of stuff up. I guessed right in a lot of areas, but I also kind of fudged a bit. So I don't mind it when people fudge it a bit. Like using a sewing machine to do a straight seam. There's nothing wrong with that. On God's green earth, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And there never has been. So anybody else want to chime in?
Yes. I think a lot of it too is back in the day, we had to make our own stuff. You know, you couldn't go and get, you know, you could go get, if you wanted a helmet, you either had to figure out how to make it yourself or get in line and wait 2 years and talk to, you know, be a good friend of one of the few armorers we had. Now you can get anything you want online within a week. You can have a complete outfit. I mean, you know, and from clothing to armor, to camping equipment, to feast gear, everything. And even just in the last, 2 years, what's changed so much is like, you know, I mean, you want titanium chainmail? No problem. Well, back then you had you could get chainmail at all. I mean, I tried 3 or 4 different times. I started making it and gave up. You know, went and bought, $200 worth of springs and started cutting them up and never finished. You know, nowadays you can, I can get a set from India, in 5 days, and it's beautiful and it's cheap.
Yeah.
Which is a great my portion. No, the point I was going to make is that AS-15. Okay, if anyone at an SCA camping event would notice, there would be a sea of blue tarp. Blue tarp was the most common thing we could afford. And boy, it was readily available. And Lisa and I put dags on our sunscreen of blue tarp, and people thought that was the coolest thing ever. And at the same time, because Lisa and I were driving around in a late model Toyota Celica, we had a folding table. And the only reason it folded was so it could fit in the back of the hatchback. And we would put out the table and the sawhorses, and people are like, oh my God, you've got a table in your camp with a sunshade with dags. That is the coolest thing ever. And again, this was AS-15. Skip ahead to AS-55 and you look at the camps and you see a sea of canvas, woodworking, and all this. But, and again, not to take away thunder from anyone else, it shows the evolution of SCA, of where we have, you know, learned from, you know, standing up, the old adage of standing upon the shoulders above giants, that we learned from our predecessors. We all got jobs, we all got nicer cars, and we even have trailers to be able to have nicer and nicer stuff. And it looks like someone else wants to jump right in.
Well,
go on.
I think one of the things we have to remember about those days also is that so many of us were students and not very prosperous. And as prosperity increased in like the early 80s, things changed. But the person who gave us this huge nudge, and I will always remember this story because my household was the autocrats, that's the event stewards of a crown tourney, and King Torgal put out a proclamation where he said, I don't want to see any more blue tarps around the Eric. It's got to be tents. It's got to be something that is not a blue tarp. So go with that, people. And you know, Amanda Kendall called me up and she said, I can't do anything until I finish this tent. And she was sewing a tent in her living room. That kicked it off. That like basically we started to raise the standards and we all went around looking and going, wow, this looks really cool. Let's build on this. But so it's Torval's fault.
No, it's not a fault. He encouraged us. He motivated.
No, he did. He asked us to raise our level, and we raised our level. And then, you know, it took another 15 years or so before the marketplace came to exist where you could buy a tent. Edward and I have always camped in a like a standard camping tent, which we hide behind a kind of a cozy thing. But we've never owned a medieval tent. We've owned one that I made back in those days many years ago, but we've never had one from the marketplace. And
I want to raise two things.
Criticize us.
I want to raise two things here. The first one is this sort of speaks to something Berek said. Ludviga, I think you're absolutely right that the access to online information has made a huge difference. But I also do think we need to recognize that the access of people like you who did all that early scout work and did the research was also really important. So I think that part of the reason we're so much better now is not only because we can get better books, but because we have better people doing that stuff. Someone in the chat has brought something up that I wanted to raise, though, and we are the worst possible panel to talk about this. Rowenna, you mentioned that in the 80s there was a transition from a bunch of college kids to a bunch of professionals, and that made a big difference. And I'm just curious if anyone here has anything to say about it. It feels to me like the bar of entry is a little higher, and it feels to me like economic inclusiveness is sort of an issue. And I'm not sure if there's anything anyone has to say about that or whether it's even worth bringing up. But gone are the days when you can show up to an event with $20 and a case of beer and sort of bum a lift from somebody and go. And it feels like the bar of getting in is quite pricey.
Hang on, what kind of beer? And we actually try in our camp anyway. We actually try to encourage people that are new to just come and stay in somebody's tent for a few times.
Nice, so
that they can get the hang of it. So I think you're right.
There's a cultural thing there though too, because when you walk in and you see a bunch of fabulous stuff and you don't have any of that stuff at home, you've never seen this before, it looks like a heck of a lot, you will self-edit, right? It's, you know, you'll go, this is, it'll take me a couple of years of preparation before I could come back and fit in with these people.
Yeah.
You know, I'll go do something else, you know, whereas if you look at a Shakespearean festival, you know, you're going there not expecting to be a participant. You're going there to be entertained by the people on stage. And that's, at one point in time, that's the great advantage and difference that we had with Ren fairs and Shakespearean festivals and such. we talked about it. The people that are here are not here to entertain you. Our operating premises is that you're here to join in and participate with the folks that are here. So, and I think that's a harder thing to overcome once we got past. It was easy to feel in those first few years, feel okay because nobody had anything, So, and I will also say that $20 when you were a youth is a little more like $100 now. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, Berek.
Can you go to a 12th night these days without spending $500 minimum to get started? I mean, everybody has a hotel room, expensive hotel rooms. When I first joined, it's one of the best things I did when I went to a 12th night is, we always got billeted out. And that's how I developed my best friends. That's how I got to know all the different people from Southern Oregon and that, because when I went there, I stayed at their place. And when they came up north, they came and stayed at my place. And that's how I got to know them. And nowadays, that's unheard of,
It's a little hard, actually, when you've got 2,000 people rolling in for an event that's going to last, and you have to camp too. I don't know about when you first got in stroke, but it took me a while to sort of think back about this, but my first few years, they were day events. And we'd rumble on up to Seattle and we'd jump out of the car and dump our stuff on the ground. There was no such thing as day shades and stuff. And we'd do the thing, and then we would do exactly what you said. We'd say, who's doing afters? Where's the party? And where's the person I'm staying with? And what's their address? How do I get there? But there was a separation between the event and afters. But now there is no separation, right?
Sorry, Berek wanted to jump in here. Berek?
I was about to say, once upon a time, and again, and the 12th night is an excellent example of once upon a time, we did not have 12th nights at hotels. 12th nights would be either at some either a Grange Hall or whatever.
A church.
But people, and usually, and if there was a feast, it would be at some place like a school or wherever on the other side of town. But the key thing was, where's my crash space? The autocrats would organize, there's crash space, who am I staying with? And we'd all go over the group. It wasn't until Rorik and Antadina, who had the very first 12th night, where we actually stayed in a hotel. And people were just so like, oh my God, we're staying in a hotel. This feels just like a con.
Didn't you make 12th night con badges for that? Wasn't that you?
Yeah, but we're not going to talk about that. Okay. That's different. And the money went to the sponsor group, so that's different. Anyway,
okay.
But the idea is that even at that time, even the West Keenan, which was still significantly bigger than us, never thought the idea of like, oh my God, having it in a hotel. But once we started in a hotel, yes, you're right. The price went up. But the idea is, but the overall thing is that we're sponsoring new people coming in. But before, when we were still the starving students, it was all crash base. The sponsoring branch was like, well, where can we find some place that's cheap? And someone says, hey, I've got an inn at this high school. We can have our feast there, but we still all go back and have, like you said, the after party, and then crash base at the end.
Ludviga. I've even tried a few times to get get crash base going again. But it seems like now people would rather stay in a hotel. I don't know. They just don't want to burden someone or burden people or whatever. Plus the other problem that we've had over the years is that we've lost those fantastic venues that we used to be able to have a 12th night in. Those venues are gone. The one that's here in Three Mountains, what was that? It was a Masonic Lodge downtown.
Yeah. It was good.
Beautiful building. And it got sold, and all of the big rooms got made into littler rooms, and it's just no longer available. Even for local events, we just don't have as many venues as we would, affordable venues that there were in the old days.
Well, in fact, I was going to mention the fact that something else that's happened mundanely is a lot of those spaces that we would use when we were smaller have now, they look at their space and say, we can monetize this, right? There's a demand for space and we can make a penny off of it. And so, you know, and we don't look like a club anymore, right? Back then, you looked like maybe a college club. And so you said, could we get use of this wall in the college? And they say, yeah, you're one of our college clubs, right? Yeah, of course we are, you know. And, you know, and that doesn't work as easily, you know. And we're running out, I mean, quite frankly, it's getting harder to get parks, not just buildings, you know.
Scale has played a part in that as well. Like one thing that's been kind of fun is for a long time, that Camp McLean site was impractical because of size, but our Crown events have gotten just smaller enough that we can kind of cram ourselves in there. And that's the kind of thing that's actually one, I mean, obviously it's not a great thing that our event sizes have gone down, but it's one small silver lining, I guess.
And that's a good comparison of how, and hopefully it's going to be talked about later on with some other speaker, is how much have we grown? As an example, Bell Fountain Park down in the Principality of the Summits could host Eagles and even a Crown event. Now it's barely big enough to handle a Principality event. We've grown over the last 40, 50 years.
Well, I think that might be a nice segue to our next topic, actually. Inclusion is a really interesting thing that is very topical now. There's a lot of talk about it. I'm interested in how, as we've grown, we've diversified. So, Ulfred, you were talking about how it used to be day events where you'd show up and do the thing and leave. And the thing used to be fighting, right? It used to be that an event was totally centered around fighting. That was sort of the central core of everything. And now, as we sort of embraced a whole bunch of other communities, that's been great. It's fabulous to see the rapier people and the equestrians and all those other people develop these thriving communities. But it has, of course, fragmented the attention of the event, which is really interesting to me. Along with this is a whole issue of cultural diversity of every sort, both of personas and of the people who are participating. So, Rowenna, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on those topics.
Well, one of the things I was reflecting on when I was getting my thoughts together about this speech was how in the late 70s and early 80s, the SCA was very Western European. When you came into the SCA, one of the things you chose was, am I going to be English 14th century or Italian 14th century, or maybe I'll be adventurous and be Spanish. And when those of us who began to branch out into those associate cultures that fed Western Europe, there was pushback from people saying, no, that's not that. We're Western European before 1650. Where do you come in? This one of the things that I responded with that, because I started out with an Italian persona when I first began in the SCA, but I discovered that in An Tir, you do not wear a dress that drags on the ground. And I shifted to, and I was also, other things pushed me to becoming a Middle Eastern persona. And I had forgotten until I listened to Duchess Lau's sister's interview that I did get some pushback. I got people asking me, how does this fit? What does this do with us? And one of the adjustments that I made is in my University of Ithra class that I taught on Survey of the Middle Ages, which is, let me tell you, a really hard class to teach. And I spent much longer on the Silk Road, the Spice Trail, and those invasions of the Middle East that the West calls the Crusades, in order to close the loop on all those influences that were happening. And now that we have much more access to various pieces of art that we could never see because they used to be only in museums and now they're online, we see far more people from cultures all over the East or South, coming into Europe, being members of the European community, and a lot of Europeans also being people who were living in various parts of the East. So that agglomeration, I've just really enjoyed seeing this. I mean, Ludwika has a Scythian persona and has been studying Scythians, and the Scythians are not Europeans.
I do remember, well, it used to be in Kapora, wasn't it? Like, I remember being told in my newcomers classes, like, oh, it's Western Europe and it's 650 to 1650. And sort of people,
and even 1650 was questionable. According to Kapora, and trust me, I know, the SCA is dedicated to pre-17th century culture. But there was a lot of people, especially out of the West, who felt that the cutoff of 1600 wasn't right. It needed to be 1650. And there was a lot of conflict over 50 years. And that was still Western European. And there were times where someone would say, oh, I want a non-European persona. And there were groups that would just lose it. It's like, oh my God, that's a Mongol. Well, the Mongols crossed the damn Danube, for God's sakes. And we're going like, my persona would have seen one of them. We don't know what to make of them, but we would have seen one. But the idea of like how and this, hopefully someone's gonna be talking about this, of how for the part of inclusion, of how the SCA grew from being a pre-17th century culture, and people even argue by saying, okay, late period cutoff, 1600. Where's that early cutoff? 1,000 years, 1,500. I mean, there's a lot of people who already feel like if you're already pushing 1,600, it's almost like seeing someone in a Star Trek uniform walking around in modern era. It's just like, it's jarring, but we know it's within our persona. But as soon as we started going early Scythian, late Germano-Roman, and then when we started getting more of the Asian and even New World personas, you know, it's like surely European courts would have known about them, and even kingdoms, and even at the board of the corporate level was thinking about, is this something a Western European would have known about? Yes, so we need to include them.
We had another inclusion struggle that was going on in those early years as well, and that was women as fighters, because the allowing women to get into armor and actually participate in the fighting was, as Berek's reaction shows, was one of those one of those things where people were unsure. How is this going to work? Can we make the right kind of armor? You know, those kinds of questions that we now go, well, wait a minute, that's no big deal.
Yeah, it was.
And there was a discussion that was on the Facebook group, I think the Kingdom Facebook group a couple of days ago, about celebrating 55 years of women in the SCA accomplishing things, and the fighter question came up. Trudy Lacklandia was knighted in 1977, so it was only 11 years after the society started, and she must have been in armor well before that in order to be a knight in 1977. So, you know, it goes back pretty far, but it was not common, and it took a while to get women into the fighting ranks who wanted to.
Oh yeah, and in 1980, Sir Mathan of Elfhaven was a princess in her own right.
Yes.
So yes, but even then, there were branches who bridled at the fact, like, why do girls want to fight? And that was, you know, trying to explain to them by saying, why not?
Well, even to the point where some of the established fighters were still refusing to face women on the field, right?
Exactly. I will not strike a woman. No, you're striking an opponent. But that's a different topic.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should encourage people not to hit women fighters. It's like if you wanted to stand there and let them hit you, you do that.
Yeah. But keep in mind what I said is they wouldn't face them on the field. Right?
Oh, that's not okay. That's totally out. That's totally off.
So yeah, I just talking a lot about the cultures. I think just in terms of the type of people that the mundane cultures that we have, you know, inclusivity and diversity often isn't about your historical persona being accepted and included and all, but rather, you know, the sense that we're awful monoculture in the modern world. And I mentioned this talking to you all folks before we got together here a week or so ago, but my memories, which, you know, are weak, but is that I was astounded at how inclusive I felt my early events were, right? And everybody that showed up, because you showed up, you were one of us. And it didn't matter, you know. Doesn't mean that over time people didn't go, wow, that, you know, I'm going to leave when he comes, but you know, that's neither here nor there. That's not, I think, the part of the topic. But we weren't very diverse. We were all college students, pretty much middle class, white, because that's who could afford to go to college. You know, of course, here we were all West Coasters. And I guess the inclusivity was more along the lines of you were here, you're included. So, and I don't know how that translates to today. Where do we take that, you know? So
I think that's partly about economies of scale again. I was just thinking as you were saying that, I remember when I started in the early 80s, like people were just so zealous to share the SCA. Like if you walked within a block of an SCA event, somebody would run up and hug you and say, have you opened your heart to the Middle Ages? Like handing out pamphlets, right? And now I feel like much more there's sort of a nerdcore, like you're not a real person. There's more gatekeeping of sort of defense of I'm a real SCA person because I've been here longer. And I think that's just economies of scale. I think when you're small and new, you want more members than when you're old and, you know, more solidified, it's less so.
I'm not exactly sure where this fits in, but another popular thing when we were young, like, or when I was young and the SCA was young, SCA people that once they found the environment, they seemed to really get a thrill out of what they called freaking the mundanes.
Oh, yes.
Which is it, when I put those things together, right? You know, yeah, those do they fit? You know, you want to go freak the people out that don't know about you, but you also want them to come and be part of you. And you know. Anyway, not sure, but anyway.
Well, I do find it funny that we're it's a bunch of middle-aged white people talking about diversity and inclusion. I'm sure that's awesome. I am curious. This sort of speaks back to something that I forget who said this at the very opening. Somebody was talking about how we're so much better at recognizing our artisans and how the diversity of awards is great because it sort of recognizes a bunch of the hard work that's happened. And I agree. I think again, like the various champions and the inclusion of people who aren't just basically fighting, I think that's great. I'm wondering about award culture. I do feel like there is a little bit of a sort of a bean counting award culture in the SCA in some fields. Anyone have any thoughts on that? No? Maybe I'm just
well, yes, but
a volunteer organization needs to have a recognition system. That's kind of a basic structure of a volunteer organization. Volunteers don't just do things for glory or having people point at them when they walk by. Mm-hmm. You need to be thanked, and you need to achieve things and be recognized for them, and that's what the words are.
And branches need a way of identifying those individuals who are contributing. This is why at the baronia level and higher, we need some way of saying these people are doing well, and people would like to get that acknowledgement. Yes, you can have the Baron and Baroness, Prince and Princess, or even King and Queen acknowledged, but the idea of being given some sort of a Benny by saying, and here's a token to show our appreciation of what you've done. Now, yes, over a 50-year history, you can argue that has the breadth of awards grown? Yes, over 50 years, each branch does. Every new barony has to have their award for service, their award for fighting, their award for arts and sciences, or even at a principality or kingdom level. There's always that perception of, okay, we have this one arts award, but we need a second arts award. Or even in the case of and in fact, interkingdom anthropology time, An Tir does not have an award for fighting. Every other kingdom does, but we didn't, because the perception of, why do we need that? The idea is that how do we recognize individuals? So you can argue by saying, do we have too many awards or not enough awards? I would say we're probably at a good balance, because people are trying to say, we're recognizing you for what you're doing, and this is what we give you, but we're not going, hopefully, unlike 20 years ago where people actually were thinking about, are we doing the merit badge approach? And there was some actual serious discussion among all the kingdoms on, are we looking at this as merit badges, peerage points, to quote an old Gerhard von Noflamen play. And a lot of the kingdoms are going like, yeah, we need the throttle back, or no, this is our identity as a kingdom. So it's almost like it depends. An Tir has always been the joy is in the service. And where if you get an award, it's just like, what, you mean you don't have it already? But at least we want to recognize you for it. But we haven't got to the point where we're splitting hairs on, here's your low-level service, here's your mid-level service, here's your high-level service, and here's a pelican and or laurel.
Ludvika?
So regarding that whole stepping stone kind of attitude, it certainly does exist. There are people who think that, oh, I got a Jaume, so I probably am going to be a laurel pretty soon, or I got a Goot, that means I'm going to be a pelican pretty soon. So what I try to encourage people to do, rather than say, I got my Jaume, I suggest that they should say instead, I received a Jaume, because that way, that puts you in a community of other people who have received that recognition. And it doesn't really belong to you. It belongs to the crown, and the crown has recognized you with it. Like I do the same thing with people who have been elevated to peerage. I received my pelican. Well, it's really not your pelican. It is the crown's. You are the crown's. So it is a pelican or the pelican. I've often heard people say, I want my court barony. Well, it's not yours. So that just to try to discourage people from thinking that that there's a stepping stone in awards, that if they recognize that those awards are all spring from the crown and still belong to the crown, then the concept of it being a box to check off is a little less evident, I think.
I like it. Ulfred.
I think in a way what you're saying, Ludvika, is we shouldn't look at it as a thing. You know, in other words, is it the medallion you wear? If I don't wear my my regalia for being a pelican, does that make me not a pelican? Or, you know, in other words, is it the stuff, or is it something else? And you know, and really what it comes down to is for the major peerages is it's that right and responsibility of participating as an advisor to the thrones, right? Now, what we call the non-advisory peerages, you know, the lesser peerages, if you will, the Goots and the Jaumes and even the baronial level recognitions don't have that same onus, although at a baronial level, you are advisors to the Baron and Baroness typically, at least in Three Mountains. I can't talk across all the baronies, but that's what it's really should be more about is you know, this is sort of our acknowledgement that you are now someone that I would feel comfortable sending other people for advice on that area that you are good at, you know, kind of a deal. Anyway, I've not said well, but I think you know what I mean.
I think I bring some modern presuppositions about this. I'm a college teacher, for those of you who don't know. So there's this disconnect between students thinking that like getting an A is just its own thing. It's this magic box that you open up. Whereas instructors sort of think that it's you acquire a set of skills and that's a recognition of a place that you're at. And so I think you guys have dealt with this super duper well. But of course, as a knight, my main experience with this is people who say like, what do I need to do to get knighted? And the answer is, well, you go make yourself a knight, right? You go find out what you admire in other knights and be better than that is what you do to get knighted. And so I sort of wanted to think about this notion of awards as a hoop you jump through to get a dangle versus like a recognition of a state that you've achieved. And I know Ulf has given me, I don't know if you want to jump in and say this better than I can. He said like there are people who are goal oriented, and I respect that, and that's 100% not me. But I think it's one thing to say like that's a state I've got to achieve, and another thing to say that's a thing I've got to get. And I really like that, Ludwig. I love your way of saying it is a goot that I got that is the crown's goot. That's a really nice way to sort of frame that as entering a collective experience rather than sort of a checkbox you've ticked off. I love it.
So there was a time when it was sort of anathema to indicate that you would like to get the recognition. That was likely to set you back an innumerable amount of times when you speak that way, you know. And in some ways, I never fully agreed that we were taking the right aspect there. To say that you shouldn't aspire to attain something, you know, that seems backwards also. But I think what it was also was we think you should be doing this because you love to do it, not because somebody's going to give you something for doing it. And that if you're doing something not because you love it, but because you think it's the thing that you have to do to get something, then you're not on the right path. You know, so.
That's my purest attitude, but I think Ulf has educated me to the point that things can be two things, that those things are both possible, right? You can love a thing and say that is the thing that I'm hoping, that's where I'm aiming, right? I think that's. Yeah,
I just think there's a lot of people that's how they drive themselves for that. It's not necessarily the only thing they want is that award or whatever. It's just that's how people focus their energy towards that.
I have nothing against being goal oriented. But I think that you end up with more bitter people that are doing something that they're not really enjoying because they have oriented on a goal. And then when it doesn't come fast enough, you know, they're feeling a little betrayed because I worked really hard at this thing I don't really enjoy and nobody's giving me kudos, you know. Anyway.
I think even Ludwig, I'm sorry, I just want to jump in. I'll go right to you in a second. I think you're both saying the same thing, because if you're looking at the goal as a hateful ordeal you've got to get through to get that trinket, then that's not the right path. If you're a person who loves what you're doing and the way you motivate yourself to go to practice when you'd rather sit on the sofa and eat Doritos is saying, if I don't do that, I'm not going to get my belt, then that's totally valid, right? But I think it's just things can be two things. Yeah, Ludwig.
I think there was a time, and I'm sure that there are people who still feel that way. That if someone says, "Oh, I want to be a pelican," or "I want to be a knight," or et cetera, that is a that's a marker saying, okay, that person's never going to be elevated. I think I don't agree with that. I may have at one point in my life, but I don't any longer. I have evolved. So I try to tell my apprentices and people that hang out with me that it's okay for you to aspire to be recognized for the gifts that you give, for the things that you do. As long as you continue to love to do that, then do it all the hell you want, and you will be recognized for it, even if you're kind of only half-assed good at it, frankly, because that there's nothing wrong with that. There's plenty of things to do, plenty of places of need in the SCA, and geez, not even just in the SCA. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to achieve that. And I no longer hold that against anyone who says, I want to be a knight or I want to be a pelican. Well, okay, here's what it's going to take.
Preach. For me, it's mostly if they're doing things solely for the purpose of getting the award, I look askance at that, right? If it's, oh, I need to change my fighting style to become a knight, I'll do that until I become a knight. I find that, but anyways, cool. That was really good. Shall we move on to the virtual SCA? All right. Berek, take it away. The internet obviously has changed everything. I don't know if this is true for you. I have a hard time remembering a lot of my friends' SCA names because I see their mundane names every day on their Facebook feeds. And it's been great in that it's magically brought us together. And I think, Berek, you're going to talk a little bit about the open marketplace, which is phenomenal. And it's been horrible because the internet is the worst possible place to communicate with other human beings, except these days for all the alternatives. And so there's, again, like all the things we've been talking about, it's a real mixed bag. So Berek, take it away.
This is going to be one of those, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Okay, prior to AS20, AS25, the only way we got our information was Shire newsletters, baronial newsletter, kingdom newsletters. If you didn't have access to a newsletter, you didn't know what was going on. When you would go to an SCA event and there was crash space, what was the first thing you would do? Show me your library. You know, the idea is that it was almost like from the Dark Ages, is that there was so little information being transferred, no one knew what was going on. It's like, but I'm talking to someone, not in an SCA event because none of our resources were there, but it was either at their home. And so early on, there was that, you know, any little bit of information was good information. The most important person, in my opinion, out of every branch was that branch chronicler. When you became a crown or a coronet, what was the first thing would happen? Your mailbox would be stuffed with news. The idea is like, and those newsletters would be indication of how productive how productive that branch was. It could be as simple as, oh, here's our minutes, here's our officers, or they would be like, oh, I don't know, the Leaf, or, you know, out of a Lionsgate, just the idea of like all these newsletters, but that was information or transfers. And this is where I get to do audiovisual, around AS20, AS25, these things happened. And then suddenly you had branches of, hey, our branch has a BBS. We're going to start communicating. Dial into this number and we can all still hear that scream. Exactly. You know, and for the old timers, this would have been like, that is music to my ears. And then suddenly a little bit of the world opened up. You had light. Before it would be like, oh my God, you're at a college, you're in a town with a university. Oh my God, I want to go to your university library and get books on stuff. And then as soon as people with BBS stuff is like, oh my God, someone's documenting how they did things. I want to capture that. And then Usenet came. Who here does not remember Rec.org SCA? The Rialto.
I remember it.
Exactly. The idea is that I am talking to someone on the other side of the known world, and they're sharing information. And then suddenly search engines, Alta Vista. I found out how to make armor from someone in mid-realm, and they somehow got copies of their, gauntlets. I'm going to copy those. And so this growth of knowledge. And so from AS20, when email started coming out, it's like, oh my God, email, we're talking to each other. And group notes. And then suddenly around AS25, AS30, branchers are going like, well, no one really likes our newsletters. We're going to do a web page. And then suddenly all these branches the branch chroniclers had learned HTML, and they had learned how to put together web pages. And even An Tir says, oh my God, we got to get a web page going because people want to know what's going on. And then suddenly 20 years ago, social media. Who had MySpace? Show of hands for MySpace. Oh, come on. But the idea is that it's almost like that part of in historical and from a history is the first printing press. Before, knowledge moved slowly. You had personal libraries. Yes, you had newsletters, but no one really knew, how do I make armor? How do I make costuming? Unless someone published, or you go to a 12, and again, this is where Crown events were really big. Someone could say, hey, I have this access to patterns. I have this access to information. But then something happened, something wonderful happened. The internet opened up the SCA to where it's almost like all this information is now being shared. Even now with the MySpace and Facebook, we now have so much information. And any person now saying, I have all this information, how to make patterns, how to make armor. As Ulf says, I can find 7 people who makes armor across all the costs. It's like, I want cheap, or I want to drop a couple thousand to make the best armor ever, and they can do it. It's a blessing. Now, again, a bit of a curse. You no longer have this focus of, are branches now important in sharing that information? No, you go onto the internet. Do branches do newsletters? No, we have a Facebook page. You get onto that. So from a virtual anachronism, it's, again, best of both worlds, the best of times. And the reason we've done so well over the last 20, 25 years is that all this information is available now, from web pages, from downloadable PDFs, from YouTube videos of, this is how you shape metal. This is how you cut leather. This is how you make patterns. To, of course, the downside. Everyone has an opinion. Some opinions you really don't want to hear about. But the idea is that the globalization is both good and bad, but yet it has made the SCA stronger, is that we now know so much more on costuming, armoring, which now with people coming in, that bar is so high. Is that, well, what do you mean you haven't gone online and done your research for, 12th century German or 15th century, English? Is that it's all on the internet? Can't you find it? And so compare that to 30, 40 years ago, where if you wanted to make a Norse dress, you just hung the towel, with the little things on the side. And it's like, oh my God, that's perfect work. So, this is how literally the internet allowed a renaissance of SCA growth. Okay, this is where we take a drink. When I was on the board of directors, we discovered email and the idea of some central location where people could share information. This was brand new. And people were like, oh my God, we learned so much. It's not like, oh, you had a Xerox copy of someone's stuff. Now it's like, oh, I can pull it right off the internet and do it. Or in the way of merchants, I had barely been able to sell my armor within my area. Now I've got international sales. I can't keep up. So the ESCA has been fantastic, but at a cost. And that cost is that we become so globalized, we become, you know, it's like, why can't you find all this good information? You're not keeping up. And if you can't keep up, and this is where that disparity of, you know, economics comes in. If you can't afford it, why are you playing this game? From a virtual contact, and in fact, look at what we're doing here. Even before pre-pandemic times, we were still able to communicate like this far away. Yes, we can travel all the way up to a 12th night, but during some 12th nights, people would have their phones out recording that coronation, recording that peerage, and posting it to Facebook, to YouTube almost immediately, because it's almost like a virtual attendance. And this is almost like how we brought more people into what we're doing. But yet it almost dilutes everything because you're not traveling. We're not getting that face-to-face. We can argue about, well, is having 12 nights at hotels bad? Well, yes and no. You lose the idea of crash space, but look at the opportunity of all these people coming together and talking in the hallways. Yeah, it's not quite an ESCA thing, but the idea of, you know, from a virtual standpoint, we're developing and growing. And now that we're using Zoom, we're using other aspects, social media, a lot of branches are communicating a lot more, but there's no wall for behaviors. Sometimes when you're face-to-face, people know, okay, I really shouldn't say this. However, with the anonymity of the internet, people can be less than ladies or lords on how they respond to things. And this is where things fall apart. We've all probably participated in conversations within the SCA where someone, because of anonymity, just is being a jerk. So, you know, basic for the idea of anachronism, it's been great. Our growth of knowledge has been fantastic. We have this almost infinite amount of information of how to get our costuming, our armor, our arts and sciences doing well, but we lose that personal contact. Comments, questions?
I was thinking, this is really interesting. No, I'll save mine to the end. You guys go. I should keep my mouth shut. You're the panel. I'm the moderator.
I found the other thing it's done for us is we've been in contact with other groups. I've been watching what some of the, you know, I don't know what they are exactly. They're not, I don't know what you call them, but some of these groups in Poland, they're not doing the Battle of Nations stuff. They're doing something different. And I've been very impressed with what they're doing, and I would really like to go to some of their events. They look like they're having a lot of fun, and you know, they're upping the game. We can get, you know, we can have better encampments from what's coming out of them, because they've really gone into being authentic. And you can get, you know, if you want to have a full blacksmith, you know, cooking outfit, you can get it from, you know, out of Poland for a fraction of the price and right away, and really good looking authentic stuff. You know, same thing with weapons and everything else. And it's nice that we can, you know, get involved with these other groups that, you know, I don't know if they existed before or not, but they're, you know, at first I heard it was the Battle of Nations stuff, and you know, they had way more than that, and I was completely unaware of. But the other problem I have is, you know, we see a lot of people sniping at each other, you know, and people getting mad at each other, and a lot of times it's not because they're trying to be. I mean, well, what's got them going is someone misunderstood the way it was written. You know, they didn't understand, because you're not talking face to face. You're not getting the inflections of their voice, so you don't know if they were making a joke or they were being serious. And then then they start getting after each other, and this whole flame wars break up, you know, start up. I had a squire, you know, not too long ago, basically had to quit the SCA because of what happened with all that. And you know, what was the way people interpreted what he said was not the way it was intended, even closely, you know, and it just goes, you know, that's where we have to really be careful with the internet, is that people start attacking each other without understanding what they're meaning. You know, I got to the point I was almost being censored from at home to make comments, because whenever I did, I got myself in trouble, even though I was not, you know, intending to do that. So I was getting to the point I was scared to speak on any of the forums. Or I have to get someone else to reread what I was saying.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the most profound changes that has happened in the 50 years of the SCA. In the early days, you know, we functioned by letters and phone calls and face-to-face meetings almost entirely. And then the change that Berek describes took place, and the pace of information accelerated so much. And this is something, for speaking as an older folk person, there's a lot of running to catch up and keep up. And there's also a lot of research that I originally did by sitting in the stacks of the library at the University of Washington that now I can just do by learning how to do searches of the Abu Dhabi National Museum or something like that. I can't even think of the sites that I can now go and find images that I need that I couldn't find before, that I'd never seen in my life. But this is really the hugest change. And it's not something that we purposely did, of course. It's where the world went, and we got carried along with it.
One of the neatest things, and this we're talking, I'm probably thinking 30 years ago, I went to a Penzic, and people were just so elated that they were able to run phone lines to the merchants. And the merchant was saying, we take both MasterCard and Lady Visa. And the idea that people were saying, oh my God, I can now buy stuff immediately. But then on the other side, the idea like, oh my God, all these merchants have websites where I can tell my friends back home, you've got to order this stuff. So you're right. It was just almost like, you know, a whole new world opened up as soon as the internet opened up for the SCA, and our knowledge just grew exponentially.
The world opened, as did our wallets.
Yeah. And the idea, but in a way, you can say, like, is it good or bad? It's neither. It's both. The idea is that it allowed us to develop so much that, in a way, in a way, you know, we discovered, like, oh my God, there's other groups that are kind of like us. We never would have known about them if it wasn't for the internet. You know, and so where Einar is saying, like, oh my God, there's Eastern European groups that are doing costuming research. We want to learn that costuming stuff too. And so all these groups are hopefully exchanging information. Yes, it's like drinking from a fire hose, but hopefully we're all able to say, can I at least throttle that information where I'm not overwhelmed by it?
And it's, as it's pointed out in the chat, it's an inclusion and diversity issue as well.
Oh, yes. Yes, and therein lies another issue of, depending where you are socioeconomically, do you have access to the internet? Do you have full access to the internet to do all this stuff?
Rowenna, I'm going to aim this at you, but anyone can jump in. I was just thinking about one of the things I find interesting about this is it feels like there's been a shift away from sort of person-to-person transmission of information to sort of global transmission of information. So Berek was talking, or was it Ulfred, was talking about you show up at someone's house for Crashbase and the first thing you do is check out their library. And I remember when I was starting out, not only sort of all those like the baronial newsletters and so on, but also things like Newcomers Ithras. There was so much face-to-face transmission of information that, like, everything you learned about the SCA, you learned from standing in front of someone and them telling you that stuff. And now that's not the case. Now, if you want to know how to fight, you don't go to fighting practice and go to fighting practice. You go online and you look at Duke Sean's videos. If you want to know how to, you know, make a gusseted arm, you go online and you find out what Rosalie's Medieval Ladies in Australia thinks. And so there's, like, I'm curious about the dynamic of that, especially as you're a minister. I'm curious about that, but anyone else can jump in as well.
Well, one of the thoughts that comes to me is a person can't really learn a skill in the same way online as they do in person. You know, I've been a dancer for 40 years also, and I have tried taking online classes during this year that we're locked in our manors, and it is not the same. It is not the same as being able to ask the teacher specifically, how are you doing that movement? Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that a fighter has that same challenge. And the face-to-face transmission of cultural information is another thing that's really important. I really think that one of the things that made An Tir the way it is, the kind and generous kingdom that it is that some of us grew up in the presence of Gerhard and Amanda, two of the kindest and best examples of how a person should be, that, you know, walked and talked in our kingdom and taught us so much about how to interact with each other. Now we are interacting with at a remove so much, and what's happening. And as a web minister, one of the things that we're cognizant of is that there are people who don't use Facebook, and we cannot exclusively transfer our information on Facebook. We have to respect those people and get to them in the ways that works for them.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag that Berek was talking about, because on the one hand, it's awfully exciting to be able to learn stuff from all over the world. On the other hand, it's interesting the stuff you lose when you're not actually talking to another human, you know? Yeah, Ludwika. Oh, and Ulf.
Ulf can go first. See it.
I was just going to comment that another thing, and I think this is very applicable in the modern world as well, but all of this has created an incredible sense of urgency and immediacy about everything. And so, I mean, Rowenna can also relate to this, but like as someone who's been involved with the An Tir web infrastructure for a long time now,